Hey all, I have an amazing episode for you today. A chap that's helped me throughout my career from his early work on Leadership Mastery Suite, Mr. James Scouller. This episode is on teamwork, which is such an important aspect of achieving enterprise excellence. And James's previous work has all been around leadership, which is also such a massive part of achieving enterprise excellence. James has kindly given us access to a number of resources through this show that you can get from his website after the show, which is leadershipmasterysuite.com and then /EE for the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. But without ado, let's get to the show, and you're going to love this.
Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where we aim to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve and create enduring, high-performance, low-impact enterprises. Learn how to enhance morale, customer and purpose centricity, focus, and calmness. Learn how to create and sustain a culture of excellence at all levels of your organisation.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Brad Jevons, broadcasting from Brisbane, Australia. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by the Enterprise Excellence Community and Group. We invite you to join our monthly virtual community meetings, where you can learn from global experts and connect with fellow members. Past guest speakers include Jeff Liker, Jeff Sutherland, Chris Butterworth, and many more. Events have included virtual excellence tours of organisations such as BHP and US Synthetic. To register for an upcoming event, please visit enterpriseexcellenceacademy.com/community. We look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to episode 183 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Mr. James Scouller on the show with us today. James is the founder of Scouller Partnership and the creator of Leadership Mastery Suite platform that I experienced so much help from myself in the past. An executive coach and author, James previously wrote the award-winning book, The 3 Levels of Leadership, and more recently, the Trilogy, How to Build Winning Teams Again and Again and Again, which we're going to explore today. Let's get into the episode. James, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been so looking forward to this conversation.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to it.
Appreciate it, James. James, you've done all this background in leadership and built these models and these past books that have been so helpful and helped me. What's been the driver to really focus in on how to build winning teams right now, this new book that you've written? What's driven you to do that?
Brad, I've always been fascinated by teams. I was fascinated by teams when I was a CEO, and I was a CEO for 11 years. I had 3 different CEO jobs, and I made notes on what I felt were keys to building teams at the time. But what really made me want to write a book is this line of thinking. If you look at really successful top companies, with very rare exceptions, I would say they're very good at achieving company-wide collaboration. And teams, if you think about it, are the natural building blocks to that collaboration. However, I know from experience, when I look at teams, particularly at a senior level, that most of them are not very good. And if you think, well, that's just your opinion, James, I would point you towards a very important article that appeared in Harvard Business Review in 2015 that involved a survey of about 100 teams that showed 75% of them fail for one reason or another. Now, actually, I was a bit surprised it was only 75%, but there's the solid proof. So I found myself thinking, why are we struggling with teams? What's going wrong? And I think the answer to it is because we don't take learning the art of building teams again and again and rejuvenating them when they get into trouble. We don't take the learning of that art seriously in business. We expect architects and we expect architects and doctors to train for 7 or 8 years, lawyers 5, 6 years, accountants 3 or 4 years, engineers I don't know how much, and yet we expect to rock up when we've got a team reporting to us and we wing it, and we think it's going to work. So you've got this activity, team building, that is incredibly important to the success of companies. It's incredibly important to how our working lives feel, because working in a bad team is horrible, and yet we're bad at it.
Yeah.
So I thought somebody's really got to have a go at trying to pull out the psychology of teams and then offering a model to nail those psychological issues. And I voted myself in to do it.
I'm glad you did, James, because, I know your background well in leadership, and the psychology and models for leadership. It's so great to apply. James, as you're talking about teams, you actually had me reflecting back to when I was a uni student a long time ago, and I just focused on Japan. And of course, I ended up studying Toyota back years ago, like I'm talking the 90s. And I felt like back then, the whole study wasn't focused on all their processes and things that people do. I was just constantly learning about teamwork
Yeah.
and lifetime employment and teamwork. That's the predominant study area that I did at university. And then, of course, since then, there's all this study and books on everything they do. But yeah, in those days, it was just how amazing they are at teamwork, which just correlates to so much. Certainly a great company, aren't they? They're one of those examples of being a good company. James,
Certainly are.
yeah. James, you've written a trilogy here with this book. So our listeners, there's 3 books in the series. And I love that because, it's such an important topic. What are the 3 main focus areas of those 3 books, James?
Okay. Well, book 1 is what you need to know about teams, in my view. So book 1 explains what a team is, what a team isn't. It explains the alternative work group units that are out there. So it gets those things absolutely clear, because most people don't know what a team is, don't recognize what a team is, and don't recognize or don't grasp when you need a team and when you don't. The other thing in the "this is what you need to know" camp concerns team psychology. So I have a chapter explaining what's going on under the hood, what goes on under the bonnet. I'm not sure which word you use in Australia, hood or the bonnet of a car.
I think interchangeable. Yeah, I think just both.
Well, in Britain, it's bonnet. But what's under the bonnet psychologically that stops teams from forming unless you know what's going on and you put in the effort to consciously become a team? Because I wanted to make the point early on that there are very powerful forces, subterranean forces, that make it tough to form teams if you're not careful. And then I offered a second psychological model for helping people start to understand the 3 big psychological issues that they must grapple with if they're going to become a team and stay a team. So book 1 is, this is what you need to know about teams and team building, particularly the psychology of them. That's what book 1 is dedicated to. Book 2 says, right, if those are the psychological issues, and I call them commit, combust, and combine, here is a 7 principle action model for nailing those issues. So simply put, if you apply those 7 principles successfully, excuse me, I'm going to cough. If you apply those successfully, you will nail the issues described in book 1.
Brilliant.
Book 3 says, now there's a slight complication. You don't apply, or you can't apply this 7 principle model in the sequence in which I describe them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in a linear or sort of clockwise sort of way. You have to come in depending on where the team is and what's going on. So book 3 is designed to help you apply book 2 in different scenarios, like a brand new team, like a team that's doing okay, but really needs to raise its game quickly, or a team that's in dire straits and needs significant turnaround fast, for example. So in book 3, I offer a brand new tool for helping you diagnose, figure out which of the 3 psychological issues is dominant, and from that, which of the many things you could do, you should do first. Because the psychological issue that is to the foreground influences which things you should work on and which things you park. And then there is a big FAQs chapter, and there is a chapter showing how team coaches might want to apply these ideas in their client assignments. So the sequence is basically book one, this is what you need to know. Book one, book two, this is what you need to do. And book three is how to do it.
Oh, brilliant. It really provides that in-depth knowledge for anyone to take the journey to really learn. James, if we go back to book one and you look at you're talking about what a team is and then an alternate, do you mind just explaining a bit just on your description for what a team is and then potentially what that alternate scenario is if you don't need a team or what it could be?
A team is a small work group. And let me just pause at that. So a company is not a team. When we talk about, the team as a company, that's, in my view, that's false. A company is a company, an organization is an organization. So a team is a small work group, typically in business, no more than 12 people. You could probably go up to 15. I mean, clearly you can in sports teams, rugby teams can get up to 15, but it's typically less than 12 people who are dedicated to completing a commonly agreed important task to which they pool their time, their skills, and their efforts and their contacts to achieving some sort of collective result, like designing a new car, like producing the storyboard for a new Disney animation. And in the process, they will apply certain disciplines to each other, like joint accountability. They won't just wait for the team leader to hold them accountable. They'll hold each other accountable. So that's the essence of a team. They've got a clear goal, which absolutely demands that they pool their efforts. They have to create a collective result, and they hold themselves accountable. And they'll create an atmosphere around it, like we succeed as a team, we fail as a team.
Yeah.
That's what a real team looks like and feels like. Now, you need a team, in my view, whenever the thing you've got to get done absolutely demands that you solve a problem together, or create something together, or execute something together, or two or three of those. However, if the thing you've got to get done does not absolutely demand solving problems together, creating things together, executing together, if each of you operating largely apart can get done what you need to get done, coordinated by a central leader, then that's fine. And I call that discipline a performance group. So for your listeners, imagine a bicycle wheel. There's a hub, there's a bunch of spokes coming out, and the spokes, or the end of the spokes, are the individual members. The leader is the hub. Each of those spokes is contributing a result, and the sum total is enough to achieve what the group needs to achieve. So a so-called sales team is typically not a sales team, it is a performance group. You add up the results in each territory or region or whatever the sales areas are called, and that's usually enough to achieve the goal. That's sometimes the same when you've got a CEO with a bunch of divisional presidents and there are no serious product or market linkages, which does happen, and there's no common need to do something like create a new culture. So if those individual elements, those members, can get the result they need by working singly, coordinated by the leader, well, even though they might meet to update each other and make decisions, they're not actually acting as a team. That's a performance group. And if that's enough to achieve the goal, it's a perfectly valid setup. The key is to understand which discipline, performance group or real team, is needed for the challenge.
Yeah, so I can imagine, James, like I'm thinking of like a technology team working within an innovative company and they got to develop new things, like teamwork's critical. But if you have a situation where a group of people are not really that dependent on each other, they can execute and do what they need to do individually, but you need some coordination. A performance group is a perfectly correct path to go there. It's great insights. James,
right. Well, can I give you an example of a performance group just to bring that to mind?
Please do, James.
I mean, you can fairly easily imagine a genuine team, like a surgical emergency crew, an emergency fire team. I've just given the example of a Disney animation team, a project team designing a car. They're all sort of fairly easy. A performance group. I was coaching the senior executive of a very, very big company, quite big, like $8 billion. And he happened to explain to me, I wasn't team coaching, he happened to explain to me that he had 6 divisional CEOs reporting to him around the world, and another 5 or 6 people who were staff people like HR, digital, finance, legal, that kind of thing. And he felt that there really were no significant customer or product or market linkages that meant they needed to work together. So what he did was hold a 1-hour meeting with them every month, some face-to-face in the country they were in, many of them on video. And he did it that way because he really didn't want to waste the divisional CEO's time.
Yeah.
And they would share an update, and then they'd have a half-an-hour discussion on something important to them, like on-time delivery, and then they'd go their separate ways. And then most of the work would be done between him and each of the individuals working in depth. And that worked fine until, by the way, they had to embark on a culture change project. And that meant that way of working would no longer deliver. So they had to figure out the culture they wanted, and then they had to join arms and execute together. There was a creative thinking element and then an execution element. So they actually had to switch disciplines, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Like that culture change scenario created, like, they are a project team. They have to own this. So they have to, all of a sudden, they're creating now. They're dependent on each other. That is such a great story, James, of how it can morph from. And I've actually seen that in companies myself where, really the senior leadership team just called themselves a group. And because it's like we're not dependent on each other, we're a group. But I guess at that time that I saw it and I was involved with it, James, there was not the awareness that we have to form as a tight team then to do culture change. And I'd say that organization, when I think about that time, there was not the awareness to go, we now need to become a tight team because we have to alter it. We need to alter our culture to go forward. It just sustained it as a group. They tried to do a culture change and it was difficult. But it's just such a great story of being conscious and knowing that there's times you might need to switch gears and become like a really tight project team to execute a dependent project together. That is awesome.
Well, that's right. And that's, again, going back to your original question, why did I write this book or these books? Because there are 3 of them. Partly because people don't realize what a team is, what a team isn't, and what alternatives there are to a team. Or really, in business, there's only one big alternative that you want. There's the performance group. Nobody wants what I call a pseudo team. And it's entirely possible, if you master most of the team disciplines, that you can switch back to operating as a performance group if you need to, so that you don't waste time, because the hurdles are higher for a team.
Yeah.
But that's only going to happen if you actually know that there are these 2 disciplines and you know what the team disciplines actually look like, and there are certain things to learn and apply.
James, I got to admit, I'm already sensing, like, when I got onto Leadership Mastery Suite and, your original book, The 3 Levels of Leadership, it blew me away with the insights and the depth of knowledge that you brought to that. And I can see that you're doing the same with teams. So thank you. I'm already thoroughly enjoying and gaining insight from this conversation. James, from that, then you then go on to this piece where you talk about the 3 psychological issues and commit, combust, combine. Do you mind explaining those psychological issues that happen in a team and what commit, combust, combine are?
Sure. So commit, combust, and combine are the 3 psychological issues that, in my view, every team has to face up to and resolve sufficiently. That's an important rider there, sufficiently. We can go into detail on that if you wish. They have to resolve those sufficiently for them to become and stay a team. That's how big it is. So commit is the first issue, and they typically arise in that sequence, but not always, again, because there's another complication. But let's stay with the simplest explanation. So they typically arise in that sequence, and I'll explain why shortly. Commit, combust, combine. So the commit issue. Think back, and I'm saying this to your listeners as they listen to this. Think of a time when you've joined either a brand new team or you're the newcomer to the team. Subconsciously, possibly consciously, but usually subconsciously, you'll be asking yourselves questions like, is this going to be a good team? Do I feel included here? What is the aim here? Do I care about that aim? How does the leader respond to me? How are they treating me? All this boils down to, do I want to psychologically engage or not? And I notice I said psychologically, because very often when we're in a team, we're told to be there. So we're physically in the room, but that doesn't mean we're psychologically in the room, as everybody will know. So that first set of questions we're asking ourselves are really about whether I want to genuinely engage. I want to commit my energy to this team. Now, notice that things like psychological safety and trust, which are much written about, much talked about, don't actually come into the picture up front. They come in a little bit later. So the commit issue only gets resolved when I say to myself, yes, I like what this group is trying to achieve. I agree with it. I think I can sense a role for myself which adds value, and I feel included based on my treatment by the others. You know what? For now, I'm in. And when enough people have said the equivalent of that, the work group has largely resolved commit, and it can shift on to combust. So what is combust about? Well, combust is essentially about power. And if anyone out there remembers the old model, trying to think of it myself, form, storm, norm, perform, which was created 50, 60 years ago by Tuckman. Combust is very similar to what he called storming. The difference is the model I've created just offers a bit more psychological depth, which you can then use to figure out what's exactly going on. But the principle is the same. So in storm, or as I now call it, combust, this is really about power. So now we're asking ourselves questions like, how do we get things done here? How do we make decisions? What's my role in those decisions? What's my power over those decisions? Am I happy with my power? Am I happy with my the role that I thought I sensed in commit? Am I happy with that around the making of decisions themselves and in the follow through on those decisions? Do I have to fight anybody here? Who do I have to fight? How powerful am I compared to other people? These kind of questions are rising, and we all know they're real, but we may not have said them consciously.
Yeah.
So there is a subconscious power struggle going on, both with other people and with ourselves, because we're trying to find a level of power that we're okay with, and we have different power needs. Not everybody wants to be the upfront, visible influencer. Some people like to be the power behind the throne. Other people would rather take it easy and let others, come to the foreground.
Yeah.
So we resolve that issue when we're saying, okay, I understand how we make decisions here. I understand my part in those decisions, and I'm okay with my degree of influence of that. And I understand how we follow through in those, and I'm okay with my role on that. And I feel that as a result of all this, there's a sense of order and structure now beginning to emerge in how we get things done. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So at that point, we're through combust, and we're merging now into what I call combine. This is a little bit more complex because it has two aspects to it. The first aspect is about trust and intimacy, or trust and closeness. And the second aspect is about where our focus is. And this is now where psychological safety comes in. I'll talk a bit about why the sequence in a moment, but let's stay with this. So now we're starting to ask ourselves questions like, are we telling the truth here? Am I telling the truth? Is he or she telling the truth? Is it okay to tell the truth here? Is it safe to tell the truth? Who do I trust here? Who can I trust? Can I say what I'm really thinking and feeling and survive and feel safe and feel comfortable? So this thing about trust is really about motives And the motive, so, and that's different from respect. So if I say I respect you, what I mean by that is I think that you're good at what you do and you have the competence, the judgment, and the skill to make it happen, whatever it is. But if I trust you, what I mean is I trust your motives. So trust is about motives, respect is about ability, in my view anyway. So this is about motives. Do you have a set of motives that could harm me or harm the team? Do you have a hidden agenda, in other words? Is what you're saying what you really mean? That's what I mean by this is all about trust. So if I think I'm getting the real you, that's when I might start to think it is safe for me to say what I'm genuinely thinking, what I'm genuinely feeling. I can now say I haven't understood, or I can offer a rather silly or a naive idea, or I can admit I've made a mistake in playing my part in the group's endeavor, and I won't get savaged for it. I won't be embarrassed or humiliated by everybody. That's where psychological safety comes in. But there is another aspect about trust that comes in, and it's that I trust that when you say you're going to do X, you are going to do X, and you're going to do it well and on time. So it's a dependability aspect of trust as opposed to the safety aspect. And both aspects came through in Google's very interesting Aristotle research of about 10 years ago. So as you deal with trust, we're starting to realize we can depend on our colleagues, and we can stop pretending and say what we're really thinking. And now then the second aspect starts to come into the picture, which I call focus. If you think about it psychologically, throughout commit, combust, and the first half of combine, it's all been about my thoughts, my priorities, my feelings, my safety. But now I've got through the trust bit. For the first time, I can really start to say, what does the team need from me? Am I prepared to put the team's agenda ahead of mine? Not to completely sacrifice what matters to me, but can I get a win-win in this? If I help the team achieve what it wants, I can also grow in the process. So now it's we or me. This is what I mean by the focus. And if we're finally prepared to say, yeah, I can see what the group needs of me, and I'm ready to do it, and I am ready to sacrifice some of my needs, not all of them, to help the group achieve, then, and most people are doing that at the same time, you're resolving combine. Does that make sense? And now you're likely to become what I call a real team.
Yeah, totally. And James, as you mention it too, it really brings out, complexity is probably not the right word, but the work you have to put into it, because I'm envisaging a new employee comes into a team, they're going to go through that commit cycle, but also too, potentially every time a new employee comes into a team, you could head into a combust cycle as we jostle for power and everyone starts to know their place in the team again. But then a lot of teams, I'm guessing, could just get stuck there, because that combined piece of trust and me or we and what happens around here and do I feel psychologically safe, I could see that a lot of teams could just get stuck back at combust, which I love what you've done here, because the old model sort of implied that you're always just going to go through those phases, but you're not, are you, James? Am I correct with that? Potentially you're going to stay at combust, Brad, and that, to me, that's so true.
Brad, you're absolutely bang on. I've seen loads of teams that haven't got to combust. They haven't got through commit. And very often, the more senior the team, the more true that is. And I think the consultancy you work for does a lot of work in sort of change and excellence and so forth. And you may well have to do some work with senior teams to help them through those issues.
Yeah.
May I say a bit of a few words on why that sequence? Because that might help you and your listeners. If you think about it, commit generally comes first, because unless and until you've said, yeah, my hat's in the ring, I'm in, at least for now, you don't give a damn about a power struggle. Why have a power struggle over an endeavor that you don't really care about?
Yeah.
You're going to psychologically put your feet up on the table and light up a cigar. Yeah. I mean, you're obviously not going to do that or you'd be fired, but that's what you're doing psychologically.
Yep.
So that's why combust always comes after commit. Why does combine come after combust? Well, that I took from some brilliant work from a psychologist who died about 15 years ago, a brilliant man who most people have either ignored or forgotten, called William Schutz, an American.
Yeah.
Brilliant work.
I've heard of him before. Yeah.
Yeah, he invented FIRO theory back in about 1958, 59. And in fact, Tuckman used his work, amongst others, to create the meta model that he then called form, storm, norm, perform.
Yeah.
And he just found in studying groups, William Schutz, that we really only turn to questions of closeness and trust, and therefore psychological safety, once we've dealt with the power issues on how we get things done here. It doesn't happen before that. So that is quite important, because if I'm coaching a team, I wouldn't work too hard on developing deep trust early on. I would concentrate on the commit issue. And the final thing I would say, you were correct. It's not like a one-way ratchet. You can have what I call micro issues that can re-trigger an earlier issue. So to take your example, let's say someone joins the team, and particularly if it's a new leader, you will almost certainly have to recommit.
Yeah. It's like, am I going to buy in to where this person's going and what they're about? Yeah.
Yeah. It all happens again. But once you've got familiar with this and you've accepted that there is some complexity to work group life, which there is, I mean, psychologists have known this, certainly psychotherapists have known this for 100 years, but we haven't brought it into business enough. And maybe nobody's made it relatively easy to understand and apply. And that's what I'm trying to do for us in business.
But even, James, for myself, where, I consult and I'm around different clients, like as you talk about commit, combust, combine, I can see that I go through that with small groups and clients that's critical I work with. I'm just thinking of one recently where people come into a room with me and it's virtually like we need to form a project team. This is often like people and culture or other critical people that are on that culture change too. And you can see there's that commit position where everyone's sort of looking at each other. And then you can sense that power struggle as you start to get to know each other and you're starting to unconsciously jostle. There is jostling that goes on. And then there's still this awkwardness that combine. Are we going to combine? Because I guess you could, if you're slick, you could move through commit and combust pretty quickly if you're on your game and that's really solid. But there's an element of combine that how long does it take people to form trust? And I guess there's a large variable spectrum on that, I'm guessing, James.
Well, yeah, this is how long is a piece of string. I mean, I think if you work at it to become from scratch a really good team, I think you're normally in a business setting talking months. If you have something super urgent to get done, otherwise the company folds, it could be done quicker. I mean, certainly elite military units, I think, can form quicker than that. But it does take time. And of course, if you think about it, to fully know whether you're safe to admit that you don't fully understand or you haven't really understood why 3 of your colleagues are pushing so hard for this objective, and you've got doubts about it. And it's okay to express those doubts and say, help me, tell me more, because I'm actually sitting here unconvinced. It takes a little bit of testing and probing to find out if it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
And it also takes a little bit of time to find out from people's actual behavior whether what they said they were going to do, they actually tend to do it. So it's not a 24-hour thing, and it's not something you can get done up front. And as I've tried to explain, there are some commit and combust, the commit combust issues tend to come first.
Yeah, totally. I'm reflecting on many sequences of this throughout my career, and I love it. Also, too, there is simplicity in the 3 elements too, James. I really love that. So, James, that first book really sets the scene and sets everyone up to understand what is a team, what's the alternate to a team, the 3 psychological issues, commit, combust, combine, which I love. The next book then really goes into the 7 principles.
Right.
James, do you mind taking us through what those 7 principles are to really think about when getting high-performing teams? And we might explore 1 or 2.
Right. Principle number 1 then is what I call motivating purpose. Simply, and by the way, each of the 7 principles has a number of action keys underneath them. But for the sake of this conversation, let's stay at the level of the 7 principles. Number one key is what I call motivating purpose. So assuming that your group knows why it exists, which I call the basic purpose, and usually a team does know that, but I have met teams, both senior and project teams, that haven't got that nailed. That has caused immense pain.
Yeah.
All right, but assuming the team can answer the question, why do we exist as a unit? The motivating purpose is the answer to the question, what is the single most important thing we have got to get done in the next X months? And X is not more than 12, to give it a sense of urgency, not too strategic. It can be part of a strategic initiative, but it's got to have a here and now feel to it. And you've got to make sure that every member of the team cares about it. There must be an emotional component to it. It mustn't be all intellectual. So I was coaching a team in Ireland recently, and they spent a day and a half working on what is our motivating purpose, checking that that really was important to them, that if they didn't achieve it, they'd feel their business had failed, they would be letting down their colleagues. Or as one person said, we'll all roast in hell if we fail. But they had to feel, I know we laughed at that, but you know, it had to feel important. And this is basic because you've got to have some sort of device for unifying and galvanizing you.
But James, how often is that missed? Like I'm with you. I'm like, step number one is absolutely paramount, but it requires us as leaders to step into that emotive bit that sometimes we don't want to. Like we like to do the work and just get the work done, but talk about feelings and motivators and
Yeah, but the plain fact is, motivation has really 2 elements. There is the desire to achieve something, and what's desire? It's a feeling.
Yeah.
And plus there is the confidence that we can achieve it. And what is that confidence? It's another kind of feeling. You're trying to get to something where people care about it and they really want to do it, and they have this sense they can just about pull it off. So a little bit of care has to be taken in crafting that goal, and then making sure when I'm coaching a team, I go back over it and ask them a number of check questions to test whether they really care about it, whether it really faces up to the major problems or opportunities they're facing. We also check whether they've got enough power or influence over it themselves. It's a bit like sports coaching. You know, it's one thing to say, I want to win the 100 meters gold medal at sprinting at the next Olympics, which is an end goal. You'll remember that example in the 3 levels of leadership. Yeah. But a sports coach will want to turn that into a performance goal, and will want to turn that into the time you've got to complete 100 meters in to give yourself the best shot at the medal. Well, you've got to do the best. You've got to do the same thing in setting this number one goal.
James, can I ask? Oh, sorry.
Well, the last thing I was going to say about this is, if you think about it now, this is the single biggest key to getting through the commit issue.
Yeah.
How on earth is the team going to get through commit if it doesn't actually know what it's committing to? And when you put it like that, it becomes also very obvious. And yet, goes back to what I was saying right at the start of this conversation. We put so little effort into learning the basics of team building that is not so obvious for most of us, me included a few years ago.
James, again, thank you. You've taken complex situations and you've made it simple but logical. Like, because my brain was already thinking about the power of that number one back to commit, and even then down to combine. Because if you don't have that unifying emotive piece, like, are you going to combine? Like, James, can I ask you one question on motivating purpose? And please feel free to debunk this if you don't agree. Like, habit change has become a real curiosity for me over the last 10, 15 years. And I often see, no matter which model I look at and which position it's coming from, they all typically say there's got to be some sort of emotional drive or some sort of meaning there to have the person practice, repeat, and work through. What's your thoughts on that too, James, where it comes to a lot of things we're trying to do in business is create change, do something different, but without motivation, are you going to actually have someone put the effort in to actually get to that position?
Well, let's say there is a company that's trying to achieve some major change. I mean, back in the 90s, when I was in my 30s, I remember total quality initiatives. And I know you were talking total quality with another guest of yours some time back. So as I listened to it, I thought, oh yeah, I remember those days. So imagine what you're trying to do is get a shift in the way people think, and as a result, the way they do the job on their own and the way they do the job in collaboration with others. So sort of think of something like that. Well, it all starts with actually the top people thinking not actually immediately about the motivating purpose or the end result or the goal or whatever you want to call it. I happen to call it the motivating purpose because it mustn't just be clear. It's got to be motivating. The first thing they've got to go through is what I call a sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo. They've got to feel a little bit unhappy about the current direction of travel. And that can come down to fear or anxiety about what will happen if they don't shift path. Or alternatively, it can be excitement at the possibilities of changing to another path. It doesn't really matter which, as long as you get that dissatisfaction with the status quo. And I have seen leaders try to shift people onto a motivating purpose. They wouldn't have used that word. They'd have used a new goal or a vision. But they skip the dissatisfaction with the status quo phase. And I'm now thinking of a man, I don't even know if he's still alive now. He possibly isn't. He'd be in his 90s if he is. And he'd skipped that stage. He was a FTSE 100 PLC chief executive, highly regarded, very powerful. The stock market thought he was great. And he tried to impose a new vision, which I, as a subsidiary MD, a young MD at the time, wholeheartedly agreed with. But I could see, and so could my fellow MDs at subsidiary level, we could see that the board members, not to his face, were saying to themselves, what's wrong with how we're going as we are?
Yeah.
Why need to change? They didn't tell him that. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, but they didn't get their shoulder to the wheel. You've got to have, I've seen it now as a principle. If you're trying to get change, before you go to motivating purpose or the vision or the goal, whatever you want to call it, you've got to get that dissatisfaction with the status quo. And again, you've got to get people feeling it. It mustn't just be intellectual, because people aren't moved by ideas directly. Ideas have to acquire a certain intensity and direction, which comes from being injected with emotion. So they've got to feel that dissatisfaction with the status quo. And then you go to that. Sorry, that's a rather longer answer than you might have anticipated, but I hope that helps.
It does. It does. I can sort of see that potentially if everyone is quite happy with the status quo, or we're in a place of apathy, we're not even going to look at a motivating purpose and go, why? Because we're in that state of it's okay. But I love it.
So the change initiative actually starts with pointing out reasons for feeling dissatisfied with status quo. And typically the best way to do that is not with data, but with stories, things that create images in people's minds, I would say.
Yeah, the old story loop, which has very quickly the problem, acknowledge the status quo, crank up the problem, then go to I love it. I love it. So James, the first part of the 7 principles is motivating purpose, which you mentioned there's 2 parts, like there's the basic why are we a unit, and then why, but then there's the motivating purpose. What's the second principle?
Well, there is actually a third element to motivating purpose, which I'll say very quickly. The third element is now figure out how you're going to keep that motivating purpose in mind every time you get together. Because you can, amidst the busyness, you can find a way of forgetting it. So motivating purpose is principle 1. Principle number 2 is now ask yourself, do you need to operate as a performance group or a real team? In other words, is a performance group enough given what you have to achieve? Now, this you can only decide on once you've worked out your motivating purpose. So this does follow on from principle 1. So I've suggested a way of just going through a quick routine to help you figure out, we need a real team discipline to help to achieve that motivating purpose, or a performance group discipline is enough. There's no point in going for a real team discipline if a performance group will do the job, because there are less disciplines to learn. There are disciplines still to learn, but fewer. Principle number 3 is what I call shared, flexed, principled leadership. And here's where you will find overlaps with what I wrote in my first book, The 3 Levels of Leadership. And the big principle here is for leaders, but also the other members, to understand that leadership is not a job, it's not a person, it's not an office, it's a process. I think of it as a 4-dimensional process. And what I try to explain in the book is you need to shift from it being about some sort of badge of honor, some prestigious status hierarchy thing, and think of it as a process. Mm-hmm. And anyone who makes the first move in one or more of those dimensions, one of which, by the way, is motivating purpose, the others are task, progress, and results, group unity, and individual attention. You're going to hear those come up again in the principles in a moment or two. Anyone who makes the first move in those dimensions is in fact leading at that point. And you realize that everybody can share leadership. And in fact, in any serious team, they always do share leadership because the leader can't know it all and do it all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a basic fact. Even Stalin shared leadership in the sense of sharing the leadership process.
Yeah.
He couldn't control directly what was going on in Vladivostok or St. Petersburg. He needed people who had the time and the knowledge and the context. So even a dictator actually shares the leadership. They might do it in an unpleasant way, but they're sharing it.
Yeah.
The other aspect of this principle is about flexing leadership according to the psychological issue, and flexing leadership according to the kind of decision that needs to be made. And finally, principle means leading by example. If you've got some sort of behaviors you want to see in the team, well, then the leader had better exemplify those.
Yeah.
That's principle 3.
Less about what you say, more about what I see you do and how you make me feel. Yeah.
Bang on.
Yeah.
Principle number 4, well, guess what? It is task, progress, and results. It's one of those dimensions of leadership. So this is all about the familiar stuff of plans and schedules and Gantt charts and all that sort of stuff. But it does start with, who do we need here in this team? What mix of know-how, but also what mix of mindsets and team role behaviors do we need? Because we know from research that most people are either unaware of or have forgotten, that there are 8 team behaviors that you always need in a business group, and a ninth option. And I don't know if you know what I'm referring to here, but I'm referring to Meredith Belbin's brilliant research from the 1970s.
Brilliant. Meredith Belbin. Yes. I'll have to look that up myself.
Belbin. Well, you'll find in book 1 that I have provided an introduction to it when talking about the 3 psychological issues. Basically, if you think about it, every team, and research shows this, for example, you need someone who's very good at coming up with solutions to tough problems, sometimes thinking outside the box, really creatively. You need somebody who's very good at turning those ideas into plans. Who's going to do what, by when? What resources are we missing? How are we going to get those resources? You know, the person who turns it into a plan, an implementer kind. You need somebody who's very good at saying, wait a minute, what could go wrong here? Let's just check that this is sensible. So somebody who's going to prevent you all going like a bunch of enthusiastic lemmings over the cliff. A couple of more examples. You usually need somebody who's very good at using their reputation for fairness and impartiality to pour oil on troubled waters. And you usually need somebody who's very good at connecting with the outside world and bringing in more ideas, usually not quite as creative, and checking that what you're up to is going to work with customers, employees, and so forth. I'll stop there. But you check that you've got that mix of mindsets and team role behaviors, and then nothing to do with job titles.
Yeah.
So don't assume that because you've got the sales guy, the manufacturing guy, the finance guy, the HR guy, that you've got the blend of team role behaviors in it. No. Yeah. You could easily end up with 11 goalkeepers by mistake.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've seen it.
Oh, and you know, I studied the Bay of Pigs scenario with Kennedy back at university, where you had groupthink happen because of that. James, just correct me if I'm wrong, but does some of that work by Meredith sort of connect back to Carl Jung's work on looking? I'm just thinking of that. Okay, totally different.
No, totally different. This was brilliant research. He started without any kind of theory. This was research done in the 1970s at a management college. They this is in the days when people were prepared to spend big bucks on training people at a residential course. They would be broken into teams of about 6 people. They would play a management game, and they would use computers. And yes, to your younger listeners, we had computers in the 1970s.
Yeah.
So they would actually play a game with financial winners and losers and so forth. And every person on the course would go through a battery of psychometric and intelligence tests, IQ tests. They were very popular in the 70s and also the 60s. And they became fascinated. Meredith Belbin became fascinated by the fact that really top managers, and these were executives from about the age of about 37 to about late 40s, and they were seen as going to go a long way. When they put really good people together, these were dismally performing teams. Why? They called them alpha teams. Why did they fail?
Yeah.
So they started observing them literally in the meetings, making notes. And then he and his team started creating hypotheses. So they noticed, for example, that the successful teams always had a creative person who could come up with fresh solutions. Do you remember the first role I described?
Yeah.
And then they noticed that person typically wouldn't be the person who turned that into doable plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was over 7, 8, 9 years that a bunch of roles emerged simply from observation and study. Nice. They weren't to do with innate personality types or anything to do that. It was to do with how we tend to behave when we're in a work group.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's not constant. My behavioral tendencies in work groups have shifted over the years, but it could be different in this group versus this group, depending on who else is in the group and the kind of things we're working on.
Yeah, the stage you go through with combust. Where do you fall out of combust even in the commit, combust, combine type position?
No, this is a bit different from that. This is making sure that you've use a football analogy, that you've got a left back, a right back, a central striker, a goalkeeper, a defensive midfielder, an attacking midfielder. That's quite a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because if you have 11 goalkeepers, they're all going to get in the way of each other, trying to play the same role. And you're going to have 10 other positions uncovered, and you're going to be a terrible team. That's quite a good way of picturing it, actually.
Yeah, it really comes back to what also the work that's being found in diversity is. And I guess we're talking diversity in that team to be able to create that ultimate teamwork. I'm definitely going to go back and reread the first book, James, and do some more work on Meredith Belbin.
There's more detail on that in book 2. So task progress and results is, yes, it is about plans and schedules and stuff like that. It's about sharp choices, particularly what you're not going to do right here and now, which is something top teams are often reluctant to do. But it's very important that you get the right people in, and it isn't just about technical know-how. It is what their behavioral tendencies are in work groups, getting that blend so you don't have 11 goalkeepers or 11 center forwards by mistake.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Principle number 5, no surprise again, this is group unity, finding ways of creating the sense of there's a we, there's an us, there's a team spirit. And this is where the trust building comes in, for example. This is where working on your ethos and standards comes in, for example. Principle number 6, again, it's the 4th dimension of leadership, it's attention to individuals. This is very much for the leader. The leader's got to get under the skin of each person and understand what they care about, what motivates them, what's going on for them, and making sure that their way of behaving isn't one size fits all. Because we have different things going on in the backgrounds of our lives. We play different roles. My grandmother may be ill. My mother may be dying. I may have different values to some. So this is about paying attention to individual nuances. And then the last of the 7 principles is what I call renew or end. If you are a project team, you will have a finite life and end, and there is a way of ending well, and there's a way of ending badly. So that's part of it. But most teams that I tend to deal with are what I would call infinite lifespan teams or indefinite lifespan teams, like senior teams. And it's really about renewing by taking a look at how we're doing. What are we doing well? What do we need to change? Do we need to bring in a new viewpoint to prevent the groupthink that caused the Bay of Pigs fiasco? So it's very similar. Do you remember a famous book from 40 years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
Very much so.
Yeah. Well, he had a principle which was sharpen the saw.
Mm,
Well, this is like the sharpen the saw principle.
yeah,
So I call it renew or end. So those
yeah,
are your 7 principles, and they help you. That's how you go about addressing the commit, combust, combine issues.
yeah. And I can really see in that, James, how you mentioned earlier in the show that it's not a linear process to go from 1 to 7. It's about understanding where your team's at, and then I'm guessing leaning in on the principles that you need to help your team go
Right.
forward.
So can I give you an example of that, so that to bring that to life?
Please do.
I mean, I would always recommend that any team, senior team, project team, gets its number 1 goal clear for the next 3 to 12 months.
Mm.
That's assuming it's got its basic purpose, its reason for existing, clear as well. And that can go wrong. So I always recommend that. So that's generally quite a good place to start. But sometimes I encounter a team, and particularly their more senior people, who are skilled at playing games with each other.
Mm.
And nobody's really telling the truth. Nobody's really engaging. There is no psychological safety, because actually there's no commitment yet.
No.
And sometimes it is necessary to get a first element of honesty and naturalness in the room, and you work on their interpersonal behavior. I use a model by trying to think of his name now. It's gone out of my head. But he analyzed conversation structures, and there are 4 player modes. Somebody makes a move. I propose that we do X. This should be our target. And then somebody will either make a follow, or they will oppose, or they will bystand. It's called the 4-player model, but I forget the person who's created it. So sometimes I will help them analyze their conversation structure so they can see what's going on. The point I'm making is exactly as you say. Sometimes you have to come in with the model on, in that case, that would be a group unity arrow that you're firing, so that then you can get some honesty in the room, so that you can have a productive conversation about, say, the motivating purpose. So yeah, as you say, it's not that. That's why I created the team fixer tool, so people can analyze their team and do it repeatedly, and then in the second half say, okay, within the 7 principle model, I should probably do something about this first.
Yeah, they're like 7 principles to review and enable you to see where we should put our effort into. It's such a good point.
Exactly.
So James, I love this, what you've created here, and also it's so in depth, but also to me simple, where you explain, a team or not a team. We've then got the 3 psychological issues to get a team: commit, combust, combine, which is I could see in that description is like a 3-stage type journey that to actually get to that combine. And then you've got the 7 principles that really talk to being able to look at a team and go, where do we need to focus? What principle do we need to lean in on to help our team get even better? What would you say in book 3 is the key aspect of then applying it and making it all happen, James?
I would say that probably the team fixer tool, which is where I come in the first chapter of book 3. This is the tool I've created, which, by the way, people can you can read. It's fully explained, and I even show the questionnaires in the book. But you can download PDF versions of that tool for free from my leadershipmasterysuite.com website, ready to go. So I would say that's probably the most important single thing, because this allows you to figure out which of the 3 psychological issues are most important in your team right now. And then that directs you to one of the 3 questionnaires you should then use to figure out a sort of a very limited targeted action agenda. That's probably the most important thing. I think the FAQs chapter is quite helpful too, because I thought, should I write out a load of questions, or should I ask ex-clients to do it? And fortunately, I saw sense and wrote to lots of clients and saying, I'm looking for questions. If you had to ask 1 question or 2 questions, what would that be? And of course, they came up with much better questions than I would. So there are 40 questions from people like your listeners with my answers, and they really put me under pressure, I have to say. So that's quite good for maybe the between the slats answers that maybe I hadn't explained sufficiently in books 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, James, I think you've really created something quite amazing here for people to work on teamwork. And, I guess leadership and teamwork, to me, I totally vote the importance of those two aspects as critical to achieving enterprise excellence. James, what would be your tip to a leader, or we have a lot of continuous improvement or business improvement leaders listening to this show, but what would be your 2-minute tip to them on where to start and how to progress forward here to improve leadership and improve teams?
Well, if they're sort of early in their journey, I would say, 1, read my 3 books, because that will disperse a lot of the intellectual and mental fog around team life, because it is confusing when you're in the middle of it. It is foggy. So I would recommend reading those. I would, of course, wouldn't I, since I'm the bloke who wrote them, but yes, I would. Number 2, I would say, if you can, hire a coach to work on yourself. I realize not everybody's going to be able to persuade their company to pay for that, but if you can, do it. Why? Because a lot of your skill as a team leader will revolve around your ability to choose your reactions to other people's behavior or to events. And what that requires, that ability to choose your behavior, to choose your reactions under pressure, that involves a measure of psychological self-mastery, which I spent a lot of time talking about in the 3 levels of leadership years ago. And if you can work with somebody who can help you at least start on that road, that'll make you feel more comfortable and less afraid as a team leader. Because I've been a team leader, a lot of us have been team leaders, and it's very easy as team leader to feel that if you're in the combust phase and sparks are going off, well, you must be a terrible, incompetent team leader. And that's when you get all defensive and irritable and tense and so forth. And that's when it's very helpful to be able to choose your behavior and your reactions. So that would be my second thing, if you can. And then the third would be start using Team Fixer to start to see what the number one issue is, and therefore the few things you need to be sort of working on.
Yeah, it's great. Really great advice. James, I really appreciate the knowledge and all the work you've done on this series of study around teamwork, as you did back on leadership in your previous book and all your work. James, how can people reach out to you, gain more information, connect to learn more?
Well, the books are out there, the 3 levels of leadership and the Trilogy, How to Build Winning Teams Again and Again. Inevitably, they're on Amazon, because you can't avoid Amazon, but you can find them on all the other online bookstores. The best way to contact me is on what I call my platform website, leadershipmasterysuite.com. That's suite spelt SUITE, so leadershipmasterysuite.com. And if they add a /EE for enterprise excellence, they will land on a special page for them where I've got 3 tools to offer them, 3 resources to offer them, which they might want to use. The second of which is, in fact, the full Team Fixer tool. And from there, they can browse the rest of the website with loads of tools and videos and what have you. So leadershipmasterysuite.com /EE for your listeners.
Oh, that's so good, James. And James, thank you for all the knowledge and information that you've provided us throughout your whole career and the previous books, current books, but also in this show, and also providing those great resources for listeners on your website. So I really appreciate everything you have done and continue to do to help us create a better future, James. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it, James. Bye for now. What a great episode. Remember, you can go to James's website, leadershipmasterysuite.com /EE, to get hold of those resources he mentioned that are really going to help you explore your teams and where you're at, a way of teamwork, and then really move forward. There were so many insights for me from this episode. I loved it. But the key one for me was the piece on commit, combust, and combine. And that simplicity of those 3 phases of actually forming a team and getting to that combine, but also the challenges that can sit around that. I guess any team could look at yourselves as a team and go, right, where are we sitting on that? Where is each individual sitting? I just love that conversation on around teams. And the other big takeaway for me was just delving into those 7 principles of great teams, and then being able to look at them and actually explore where are we at as a team. Like leadership and teamwork are both such important aspects of achieving enterprise excellence. I mentioned in the show my early times back at uni studying Toyota. It wasn't about tools and techniques, it was all about teamwork and lifetime employment and culture and leadership. And what James brought to this episode just really brought me back to that, and the importance of actually putting effort into teams and considering teams and understanding where we're at and being able to really focus on what we need to do to get even better. James, as always, has brought to us a very simple way to do this. I'd recommend the 3 books. They're going to be books that I use forevermore throughout my career. And I just want to say thanks again, James, for your time and effort. Thanks for helping us create a better future. Bye, everyone.